Okay, well, welcome to this NORC call with new state ombudsman talking about the uniqueness of the ombudsman program. This is August the 28th of 2020. And I want to welcome all of the new state ombudsmen and their mentors to this call. We are going to be talking about the uniqueness of the program. And so I'm opening up my Can you guys see the slides?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so we sent out some homework, and I'm wondering if anyone, especially the new folks, would want to weigh in on maybe just one thing that you caught that was that makes the ombudsman program different from other types of ombudsman programs.
This is Stephanie. So for me, just kind of reviewing this information, because during my first month of being an ombudsman, I looked at all of the trainings and the videos and read up on kind of the unique aspects of the LTCO program. But the way that it was established, and I love the history of the ombudsman program, and that for us in Alaska, we're separate from other state agencies, but I also realized that there are three types of ombudsmen. So our focus is on residency, and we're the voice of elders and advocates for our residents. So that's what stood out for me.
Excellent, thank you. And that's exactly the point that that we're hoping to get across, is that there are other ombudsmen that you will come across that are typically with a state or a local, like a county, or within an industry, a university, and those people tend to be very neutral in what they do. And so when the long-term care ombudsman program started, we are seen as a advocate ombudsman, which means that we have a client, and we are not neutral when it comes to advocating for that person. So what, anybody want to talk about a regulation or a policy that you have in place in your state that deals with confidentiality and conflict of interest issues? Mark or Joe, you guys want to jump in on this one?
Sure. So, gosh, I guess it was in 2012. From 2010 to 2014, I was an ASOP president, and we were working at that time with congressional staff to get a lot of what we wanted into that reauthorization of the Older Americans Act in that eventually, well, we thought it was going to be in 2014, but it ended up being in 2016. And we were fortunate in that we were also updating our state statute at the time. And I was able to really take a lot of the stuff that we were putting in the Older Americans Act and just copy and paste it into our state statute. So they're almost identical in terms of the statutory provisions for the office. We've got good language around confidentiality. Our protections are even stronger than the federal provisions. Not only do we protect the identity of the complainant, resident, or other patients, but we also protect the identity of witnesses. We want witnesses to feel that there's safety in reporting to us that we're not going to disclose their identity to their bosses. With conflict of interest, you know, we again, I think because of the federal rule, we've gotten tighter with conflict of interest. We've developed an organizational conflict of interest form that our host agencies have to complete each year. Not just at the beginning when they're designated as the local ombudsman entity, but each year, because things may change. And we used to have an individual conflict of interest form that people would complete when they were applying to become an ombudsman. But again, things change, and we would discover, conflicts of interest later, after the fact. So now the conflict of interest for individuals is also renewed on an annual basis.
Yes.
This helps us, make sure that things that we don't know about aren't affecting any conflict of interest provisions.
Excellent.
That's good. We in Florida, I've been doing this for 14 years here in Florida, but not as the state ombudsman. And we've got a bit of a divergence in the state law dealing with confidentiality and the federal, under the reauthorization in 2016. So we're needing to get our state law in sync with that. And as far as the confidentiality, we're doing pretty much the same thing and having an annual review of both individual and organizational.
Yeah, I think that's so important to think about doing it annually. I'm reminded of area agencies on aging and other local nonprofits that change board members, and you may have no issues for many years, but all of a sudden you'll have a nursing home administrator who is now a board member, and that issue needs to be handled in how is that board member going to, be involved in approving budgets or other issues that might impact the local ombudsman. Mark.
Yeah, I just, two things really quickly. One on confidentiality, and hopefully this benefits the new folks, that as people turn over in certain positions, you're constantly kind of re-educating them on the confidentiality piece. Particularly for me, it's been around the issue of mandated reporting. And
Right.
it's very difficult for some folks to understand that we are not mandated reporters. And most recently, a couple of years ago, our state unit on aging got a new general counsel. And so he was reviewing policies and stuff. And basically was just having a hard time wrapping his head around that. And so it took a while to help educate him as to why we're not, that people are going to tell us things, but we're totally resident focused in the sense that they're directing it. And they can tell us things that sound terrible and then but I don't want to be identified. And so while you can educate them about, we work with those folks to try to encourage them or find other ways to address, serious issues of abuse and neglect. But at the end of the day, we're not going to report that. And you'll get some weird responses. People will say, "Oh golly, you're not for protecting residents." And I think they forget that we're not there to necessarily represent residents' best interests. We're there to represent their interests, and
Right.
that's a constant sort of piece of education I think you'll find yourself needing to do as certain people turn over in state agencies. The other conflict of interest piece, when I came to New York, and we were using hundreds, probably about 800-900 volunteers, I had realized that many of the volunteers had family members in the facilities they were assigned to, and didn't feel like that was obviously appropriate, presents obviously the obvious conflict of interest potentials. And so really, I would encourage you to look at your state's conflict of interest policies just to make sure that things like that are in there, so that, particularly if you're using a lot of volunteers. And there was a little bit of pushback on that initially because they were getting people obviously that wanted to help, and smaller communities around New York, and it's like that they didn't necessarily see that as a conflict. So it took a little bit of education even amongst my local coordinators to help them understand we can't do that. So
Right.
You know,
That's
Mark, we had a situation even here in Florida that actually the Florida law specifically states that the ombudsmen are mandatory reporters. And so we had to deal with that particular issue and just showed them and really had to go back to the Federal Register under the comment sections in dealing with this issue to help them to understand that the nature of our program rests on confidentiality, and we can't have that subverted in any sort of way. APS were yelling at us for not being mandatory reporters, but we had to share with them, and we're not, and for the rational reason of why we're not. They come to understand, but they don't like it, but we still haven't got the Florida law to change.
But you know, like I say, I think that's one of those sort of education things that you're always doing because they're always pushing against it. And then what I found was anytime someone wanted to open up the state statute with regard, particularly in New York, with regards to abuse reporting, and legislators, because they don't understand, they're just trying to do they think they're doing the best thing. It's like, we need to bring as many people into that tent of mandated reporters as possible. And it would just always wind up being best.
I would share that as a new ombudsman, I've had to tackle all of the above things that we're mentioning today. And so pleasantly surprised that our ELASA statutes line up with our federal regulations in that regard. And in terms of the conflict of interest, our previous deputy long-term care ombudsman retired in June, right? So that led us on a search to a new deputy long-term care ombudsman who we just hired and will begin on September 21st. But and so thankful that our conflict of interest is laid out really well. The individual that we offered the position to is coming from a long-term care setting, right? And not only that, her stepfather is a volunteer of the program. And so I had to lay out how I would remediate those conflicts of interest, and that in terms of for our office, the deputy would not be on any of the case consultations as it relates to the Pioneer homes or for the long-term care setting that she was, that we stole her from, and that we would also make sure that she will not be working with her stepfather in that regard in terms of a volunteer, and have assigned her stepfather to another ombudsman that will provide guidance and direction to that volunteer. So that was really interesting. In terms of confidentiality, we just had a training with our volunteers, and our speaker was Sandra Jenkins from Adult Protective Services, who shared during our volunteer training that we are mandated reporters, and we had to clarify that right away so that our volunteer ombudsmen are not confused about what she perceives as our role in terms of confidentiality as well. So as a new ombudsman, boy, oh boy, it's fascinating, especially being in human services for a long time when you have been a mandatory reporter, but now moving on to being an ombudsman or part of the ombudsman team, you are not a mandated reporter. So
That's a great example, Stephanie, of the dangers of inviting outside experts and maybe reminding them that they need to just talk about whatever the topic is and not get into what the role of the ombudsman is or whatever, but also for you to be listening. I think all of us that have been doing this for a while, we're on the edge of our seat when another speaker's talking to our staff or volunteers, and we are prepared to say, let's time out, or we figure out a polite way of saying what you just heard isn't true. And so that is wonderful. I think that the whole what you guys are talking about really brings to light why it's important that we continue to educate people that we work with about what our role is, about what the Older Americans Act says about the program. So, because, you know, we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but, you know, we sometimes use the same terms in the work that's being done in different programs, but the definition of those terms is different. And so any opportunity you have to educate individual legislators, people in the governor's office, even people within Adult Protective Services and the survey agency. I mean, some people think they know what we do, but in reality, they may not have the full picture. So this is just, you know, one of the questions was whether or not you share with your local programs so that they have the understanding of the role and that they see where there might be potential conflicts of interest. I mean, again, you know, sometimes people have been doing this for so long that they don't even recognize that, oh my gosh, I have a volunteer that's visiting the home where they have a loved one. And it's been going on for so long. Now, how do I stop it? But I think that any of us that have dealt with something like that recognize that you cannot have the emotions of a family member and still think you can be a good advocate for the other people, because your emotions are going to take over. And so just in summary of what I hope that you guys saw, or if you haven't had a chance to look through the materials, I hope you will. You know, we've been, the Ombudsman program has been criticized as well as praised for the role it's taken and the work that's done. If you have a citizens advocacy group in your state, you may have found when you came in that there was tension between that group and the Ombudsman program, and that's kind of understandable. Typically, those citizens advocacy groups are made up of family members or former family members who have no boundary on how they can do things. So they want, you know, let's close the facility, let's make the front page of the paper, let's, you know, protest in front of the governor's office. Whereas the Ombudsman program is taking, again, its direction from the resident, and who, while not really worrying about the bridges that might be broken, still has to maintain enough of a professionalism that they're not cutting off bridges, so that they can't, you know, continue to work with the facility administrator or the legislature or the governor's office or anything. As was mentioned, the Ombudsman program is an advocate ombudsman as opposed to a classical ombudsman. We advocate for somebody. Our jurisdiction is that we're interested only in the interest of the resident within long-term care facilities, and that to solve something, we are looking for the positive answer that we have resolved this to the satisfaction of the resident. Much different resolution success than the survey agency, Adult Protective Services, law enforcement, where they are looking for, was something done incorrectly, wrong, illegally, with a penalty. That's not, no, we may eventually get to that, but that is not our role. Our role is the resident now safe based on what they say, happy based on what they say. The other thing that stands the Ombudsman apart from other agencies is that we work on systemic issues. It's not just what one resident wants. We do have the ability and the requirement that we be looking at facility-wide, industry-wide issues that would impact multiple residents in a positive way. And that probably, for those of you that work within state government, is probably one of the hardest things if you've got new management above you, to help them understand that you are supposed to be going to the legislature and talking to them. You are supposed to be, you know, a local program might need to go to the city council, that you might be going to a corporate meeting to talk to someone about a policy that they have. Joe and Mark, do you guys have an example maybe of where you were trying or wanting to do some systemic advocacy and you got a little pushback, and how you might have gone about saying, this is what I'm supposed to be doing?
Yeah, you know, I can remember, you know, early on in my career as an ombudsman, I didn't have the same independence then as I do today. And, you know, lamenting to Mark and to Sarah Hunt, who used to work for the Resource Center and for NASOP, about, you know, not being able to speak or take a position, and how frustrating that was. And, you know, years ago, one of our colleagues was coming under that same pressure, and her situation was a little bit different in that she had been able to speak, but got a new state unit director who wouldn't allow her to speak, and it became very contentious and hit the newspaper. So my boss at the time was on vacation. So I saved up all these news articles and gave them to her when she got back, and said, I think we need to talk, because I don't want this to happen here. And she and I had been pretty adversarial in the past. It wasn't the best relationship, but she read those articles, read the law, and became my champion. And we went to our Health and Human Services Agency and the governor's office, and they took the muzzle off, they took the shackles off. And when we updated, as I said earlier, we updated our statute in 2012. We got some really good language in there. The statute says that the state ombudsman shall analyze, comment on, and monitor the development and implementation of federal, state, and local laws, regulations, and other governmental policies and actions that pertain to the health, safety, welfare, and rights of the residents with respect to the adequacy of long-term care facilities and services in the state, without interference from the office of the governor, any state agency, or other entity. So it's been really helpful to have that in the statute. And as we get new folks, when there's a change in administration and we get new folks at the governor's office and new folks at our Health and Human Services Agency, we take that primer from the Resource Center and, you know, make it available to them and show them that, you know, we're not trying to be difficult. We're just trying to do our job. That's, that's it. This should be one of your best friends. It's extremely helpful.
In fact, yeah, obviously I have it in here. You all should have a hard copy. And if you want more than one hard copy, you can get a hold of Pearl Barnett, or you can get a hold of us and we'll get you in touch with Pearl at what used to be Nashua is now Advancing States. She will send you 1 to 20 copies of it. I know that several people like Bev Laubert, she ordered like 15 copies, and she went and gave it to every one of her management within the department and other people. They sat down, they went through it, and there is a lot of good information in there, including a whole section on the unique role and responsibilities of the program. And there's some conversation starters. So if you have not read this, and you can read it online right here, or Google the primer on our website, or look on your shelf and have a copy of it. So thanks. Mark, did you want to jump in?
I would just say I wholeheartedly endorse doing that. And Joe's right. I mean, that has actually been a good tool that I've been able to use to educate new state unit directors, and so it's very valuable. I think the Ombudsman rule that was put in place in 2016 has done a lot to advance the independence of our voice, because it has been a rough road for a lot of us, and in some states rougher than others. I know, Mike, in Florida, there's been issues. Iowa's had, Indiana at one point had some issues. And hopefully those have gotten better. But there's always still those battles. And probably my single recommendation to newer folks would be to have a conversation with your boss, the state unit, whoever you report to, about there are going to be times when we're going to need to speak out. And while I may consult you, it's not for permission, but for advice, perhaps. There are still state unit on aging directors I know that want an ombudsman to essentially provide them with testimony or position papers ahead of time, almost with regard, in a sense of like, you need our permission first. That's not the reality. I mean, that's not the way the rule is written. I think it's always good to let your boss know what you're doing, so they're not blindsided. But that's different, and to get their support if possible. But that's different than getting their permission, which you do not need. So, in New York, before the new rule was put in place, and I left there in 2016. I was working to try to update and increase the personal needs allowance, which was stuck at $50 for like the last 30 years. And we were making a lot of noise, and literally we got a call from the governor's office saying, please stop that, because otherwise your job is going to be in jeopardy, because that's not part of what the governor is supporting, and there's budget impact and all of that. That was disappointing. They didn't care what the new rule was going to be. And the other thing I'll say, though, and this may be helpful for those of you in states that have a local ombudsman association, I then just said, okay, I'll do that. But the locals approached local elected officials and, approached it from that part. So I wasn't able to lead that effort, but I was able to figure out a way to make sure that we still were trying to advocate for that. So it wind up being a little cagey, creative maybe is a better word. Hopefully you don't encounter so much of that now that there's the rule and you've got the primer. There's just a lot more, I think, regulation and rule behind what we do. So I think, but it is a good idea to talk to your boss about that, because sooner or later, one of these issues is going to come up and it's going to be prickly.
Mark, you mentioned Florida. Of course, we did have a problem, and AOA came down and looked at that problem in detail, and then we ended up having to end up with a correction, a letter from the Secretary of Elder Affairs, who was a previous secretary, and so I pulled out the old papers and had a discussion with the secretary about that, and I don't see that as being a problem with us. And the key here, and the key in the regulations as well, was not to broadside, your boss about what's happening, but let them know and to work collegial with this, but with the understanding at the end of the day, the position that you take as a state ombudsman is the position that will be taken. And so having that understanding up front, I feel very comfortable with that in my position right now. I think we've got a very good understanding.
That's perfect, Mike. And that, that's really all we're, recommending and suggesting here is that you need to be having some frank conversations, and try not to wait until, someone above you has said, stop, but to have that conversation ahead of time. So the other thing that sets us apart is that there's a requirement that the Ombudsman program help in the development of resident and family councils and even in citizen advocacy groups. I tried my best to be very supportive of the statewide advocacy group, even though every newsletter that they mimeographed at the time and sent out criticized me, criticized my program because they didn't feel like we were strong enough. And some of that was well warranted. For the entire time that I was a state ombudsman from '89 to 2012, I had to beg to go over to the legislature. And that was to sometimes just even sit in the audience and then hope that someone would notice me and say something. But because I hadn't spent a lot of time there, there often wasn't someone to say, oh, I see the ombudsman is in the audience. So I'm thrilled now with the rule being in effect that Jenny, as the state ombudsman in Missouri, now does, is allowed to go to the legislature and everything. But anyway, so having this conversation is very, very important. We're advocates. We carry the message of residents. We are impartial when we're gathering the information, but we are advocates in seeking a resolution. So some distinctions in definitions, how the facts are used is different with the Ombudsman program. Again, we're gathering information to ensure that the resident is satisfied, while others tend to look at this as whether or not a law or standard or regulation has been violated. That's something good for you and all of your representatives to understand. And it's a good point to point out to the policymakers and people above you. Other organizations and agencies look to the law and say this is what we're trying to get to, whereas the Ombudsman program looks beyond that and says, what are the possibilities? Here's where the law is, but where could it be? Where should it be? And so that's an appropriate role for us to question whether or not a law is good or it needs to be revised, and whether or not it's being applied appropriately. Oops. Confidentiality, we've kind of already talked about. Many places have confidentiality policies, but I don't think they're anywhere near as strict as the Ombudsman. We talked about being mandated reporters, and we are glad that federal law takes precedent over state law. And Joe, I am just real envious that you were able to take the federal law and just kind of dump it into the state so that if anything ever happened at the federal level, you would still have that. It's interesting. Many of us would like our state law to grab the federal nursing home law and put it in so that so that there wouldn't be a difference. In some states, there would be like, oh no, ours is much stricter than what for nursing homes and what the feds are. We've kind of already talked about this. I will mention that in the there was a study that was done by the Institute of Medicine called "Real People, Real Problems," and they looked at conflict of interest in several different they call it dimensions. One being loyalty. That sometimes, it's real clear that we're not supposed to take money. We shouldn't be we shouldn't even be, eating a meal at the facility without reimbursing the facility. And sometimes that gets real tricky when we use, maybe you even have meetings in the facility. And so if you do, and they're offering snacks and stuff, the program should be saying we want to pay for these snacks. We've even got to the point where, is it okay to attend an in-person state conference put on by the nursing home industry? And I'll tell you that I went. I mean, I expected them to give me a free ticket to go, and I went. And I actually even expected them to give me an exhibit table, and I took that. Now, there are some state ombudsmen who absolutely would not do that. They say that's, we will pay. And I just always felt like I was doing enough education for them because they had asked me to be a trainer and I would do that. So I don't know, Mark, if you have a thought on attending other events put on by the industry and whether or not that's a conflict of interest to not pay.
I guess it's always been for me, it's been case by case. If they're asking me and I'm doing a presentation and I consider it to be educational, then, sitting there with them having a dinner, it's like, okay, I think I can, that's not that, I think we could consider that nominal. Plus I'm there to provide information. One time I went to, I think it was when I was still in the Commonwealth, I went somewhere, did a presentation, and I didn't realize, but afterwards they gave me this like huge gift basket. I mean, they were giving them to all the presenters, and you graciously accept it and then turn around and donate it. You don't want to be doing that sort of thing, but some of these things where if you're not doing a presentation, if you don't have a role to play where you're trying to educate somebody about the program or maybe resident rights, then I've always felt a little awkward about doing that. So it just kind of depends. And then every state or organization has always had some definition of what was allowable to accept or what they considered nominal. And I've been in organizations where it was as strict as, oh gosh, don't accept a cup of coffee, to something else. Now, I will say this, I have gone to facilities, individual facilities, where you do a presentation, they want you to sit and have lunch with the residents or something. Usually I'll sit with the residents, but I won't eat.
One of the examples here was a family calls up calls up an ombudsman and says, please come to this family care plan meeting because we need some help. And when the family arrives, they see the ombudsman and the administrator walking back into the facility after having lunch together. And the question then is what's that family thinking? Are they thinking this is not good? This person's already aligned with the facility, so they're not going to be my advocate. And I think that kind of goes in with the loyalty. Sometimes it's a perception.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, you go to a facility for a care conference and, don't sit on the same side of the table as the staff, sit with the resident, sit with the family, it's all about perception.
Absolutely.
I get calls from administrators often say, Mike, will you come and mediate for us? And of course, I'm choking on the word mediate.
Yeah.
And share with them. I understand what you're saying, but understand that I am an advocate for the resident and solely for the resident. And if you'll talk to the resident and ask the resident to give me a call and invite me, I'll be more than happy to come. But to show up without the resident's knowledge, I wouldn't do it.
Perfect. Stephanie, were you going to say something?
I was. I learned this very quickly. I attended a mediation session with one of my ombudsmen and family member and a family member's advocate. And I sat on the same side of the table as the administrator and the director of nursing. Then afterwards, and I thought we did a pretty good job of, you know, listening and helping the administrator and the director of nursing to understand what the residents rep and the resident wanted out of the meeting. But afterwards, I stayed and talked with the administrators to get to know them a little bit better. The family rep called me that afternoon and said, well, I thought you were on our side. What did you guys talk about afterwards? So it is the perception of, you know, are you on our side or really are you, you know, connecting with the administrator here? So learned my lesson very quickly on that one.
Yeah,
it is. There's another thing here in the South, you know, we're very huggers and so forth. And you walk into a facility and, you know, the administrator comes and wants to give you, you know, if a female administrator wants to give you a one-arm hug or something like that, you know, and I share with our ombudsman, you've got to be aware of the perception that that brings. And I share with them, I usually carry a, you know, a portfolio, and I always have it in front of me like this. So when they come, you know, that's, it's hard to do and back away from it. But those little things of perception really are picked up by the residents, and you need to be real careful of that.
You know, I think that is such an important message, and it's an important message to push out to your representatives. Now, during COVID, it's going to be a little bit easier to keep to keep that. But even just a, hey, you know, Mike, how you doing? Been a long time. We need to get coffee again. Even a comment like that will set someone who's already paranoid or suspicious or not trustful, and so just being aware.
Yeah. And I wouldn't respond to the comment. You know, I would just be really stone-faced, and then I'll deal with them afterwards on that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I would always try to leave with the family. I would purposely not stick around because I didn't want them thinking, what are you doing? But yeah, it's like I wouldn't even have thought of that. Except now, I mean, I'm very cautious now where I sit and who I'm sitting next to and everything. Okay, so and here's the primer. We mentioned that if you've not looked through it, it's worth 20 minutes to thumb through it. Let us know if you need a copy of it. Oh, well, hey, let's have some discussion. So, Lisa, you raised a question during the open call yesterday about what do you do if you've got someone above you that may not get what the role is, or how do you help people understand better your role? Is that close to what you were? Because I remember that Joe and Patty both said they would help you.
I don't know if that was necessary. I mean, I talked about assisted living facilities being notified from the Department of Health that the ombudsmen were supposed to be allowed re-entry of the facilities. However, I'm getting notices now from my locals that administrators are saying, what guidance? We didn't get anything from DHS. So I'm having a lot of fun with that one as to trying to communicate better with our Department of Health as what did you guys tell them? And communicating with my boss and my boss's boss. And then I had a meeting with my boss, his boss, and then her boss, all the way up, and trying to tell the one up here, hey, did you know that we're not getting copies of these letters? And if you really want to help me out, I would really appreciate that if other agencies, because last time I checked, I was an Arizona state employee too, that if they're going to send guidance out to facilities concerning the long-term care ombudsman, that maybe, just maybe, they might want to notify an ombudsman, just a little, so that we know what's going on. Because right now, as my locals are trying to get ready to start going back in September 1st, we're walking into a storm for sure. Like if people do not have these letters and they do not have this guidance, we're going to be fighting with them at the front door. It's not going to be fun.
Yeah, thank you. And, you know, I misspoke. Patricia, Patty, it was actually you and Mike and Patty Ducaye were the ones that offered to help. That you're, I don't even know if you want to talk about it here, and you may not, since we are recording this, but sometimes.
Oh, no, Carol, my question was, in our policy and procedure manual, and as a state employee, I am not allowed to lobby. And so I had talked to my boss regarding that. We're going to look into the definition of lobbying, and talk to our Attorney General to see exactly, you know, what I can and can't do, see if those policy and procedures as an ombudsman need to be changed, and see if maybe my employment needs to have different wordage. We were going to check all into that. And then I had wanted to see, I thought I had remembered in the very beginning when I came on as a state ombudsman, someone else having to do the same thing. And Mike and Patty offered to kind of give me some guidance on that and help me through it. So.
Yeah, Patty, that was the issue that I was speaking earlier on, that the Administration on Aging actually came down and investigated the state of Florida for violating that particular issue. And it's specifically laid out in their guidance and instruction that the state, which required the state ombudsman to be a lobbyist, but wouldn't allow him to be a lobbyist in order to effectuate the mandate that he has as a state ombudsman. And therefore, the directive came down based on, if you're going to continue to receive funding under the Ombudsman program, Title VII, then you will ensure that the state ombudsman has access to the legislature. And so it was very precise, very clear. And if you'll send me your email address, I'll be happy to forward copies of that on to you.
I tried to find your email address yesterday, Mike, and some of the correspondence we've had from Carol, and I couldn't. So I'll put mine here in the chat box.
All right, mine's very easy. It's phillipsm@elderaffairs.org.
There's also some good language in the federal regulations.
Oh, absolutely.
Systems advocacy, and it talks about policies and procedures related to systems advocacy that assure that the office is required and has sufficient authority to carry out its responsibility to analyze, comment, and monitor the development of laws. And it goes on to say that such procedures must exclude the ombudsman and representatives of the office from any state lobbying prohibitions to the extent that such requirements are inconsistent with Section 712 of the Act. So even the regulations say what we do is not lobbying, it's systems advocacy.
So, Joe, do you have this memorized and you're just kind of looking off into this, or do you have these posted on your wall and you're reading them? Because dang, I am impressed.
No, I knew it was in there, so I just pulled it up.
Oh.
So I'm reading it on my other monitor.
The fact that you could do that is pretty impressive too.
I'm good, but not that good.
Go ahead and tell us what it is, Joe. It's 42 CFR. What is it? 1227.
CFR 1324.11. Let's see.
Well, it used to be 20.2027. They changed it to 24.
Right.
Joe, can you copy and paste and send that to me?
Sure.
I'll send it out to everybody.
That's a good one.
Sweet.
Thank you.
Should I put it
Okay,
in the chat?
we've got about 5 more minutes. Anybody, Mike, I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
Should I put it in the chat?
Pardon? Oh, yeah, you can put it in the chat. That'd be great. Anybody have any questions? Stephanie, Patricia, Lisa, Patty? Oh, that is you. Patty and Patricia, you're confusing me here.
I'm
Mike.
sorry. I have 5-month-old lab puppies, and so I like to be on the computer and you know, see the big screen there. But I always go on my iPhone also in case I need to go get them out of a mud puddle or take away a stick or something that they're chewing on in my living room. So, that's why I'm always on both.
That's
Probably chew on
perfect.
your laptop. Yeah.
That's perfect. Well, let me ask you guys, do you all have the app on your phone?
No, I don't.
Yeah. Oh, flip phone. Yeah. Okay, Mark, that's fine.
Way to go, Mark. I'm my kind of guy.
Oops, there's my annual or my daily call to make sure that I have signed up for my Medicare insurance. Okay, I'm going to mute myself so someone else talk. Okay, well, nobody's talking. Amanda,
I was just going to say, you know, as you encounter these issues and you're not sure where to go, reach out to your mentor or somebody else in the network who you are getting to know and bounce stuff off of them. I can't tell you, you know, how many times I would talk to Mark or again, Sarah Hunt or Carol or Bev or Patty, and, you know, just to kind of talk things through with people really helped me. You know, just having a sounding board and someone who would encourage me and tell me not to give up. And, you know, the camaraderie among this group, you know, there aren't a lot of egos amongst our peers, and people are very willing to take the time to talk to you. I've never met or worked with a more supportive group of individuals.
You know, and I think that's all the way through the program from, you know, throughout my state. You know, it's just ombudsmen are unique people.
Yes, we are.
Oh.
I know for me, I definitely appreciate being able to give Carol a ring or send out emails to people to ask questions. Sorry, my camera goes off and on. I'm starving, and so the tacos keep staring at me. The joys of back-to-back meetings right in your lunchtime. It's like, oh, 9:30 to 2, what are you doing? You're going to be glued to your computer. Okay.
With a taco.
Hey, vegan tacos, pretty good.
and I tell you, there's something special about seeing people, seeing people's faces. I think the ability to not multitask is probably the greatest benefit to actually being on camera. But I think if you wanted to eat your taco, we would not. We might comment, but we wouldn't. You know, I got on a call the other day and I said, I'm sorry, I am hungry, and so I was eating. I was kind of like that, like this, so that they knew I was there. But well,
it's funny. Some of you probably heard my doorbell go off when I turned off my camera. I opened the door and it was one of my staff. She showed up on my doorstep with 2 masks for my kids. Just, I haven't seen her since March 18th. I went to the office on Monday to to get away because I've got my wife working from home, my 2 kids in school. The bandwidth literally is non-existent. So I went to the office to get some work done, and I forgot that 2 of my staff were going to be there as well. Again, I haven't seen these women since March 18th. I almost wanted to cry. It was so good to see them, you know.
Oh,
Yeah.
Just if this is how we're feeling,
Yeah.
how are residents feeling?
I
Well,
often,
This is Amanda. I'd like to just comment, what we do by advocating for residents, it seems like it's something that is inside of us that just pushes us to advocate and to do for our individuals. But this past month, I've had an opportunity to see what really our residents are going through. My husband had a heart attack on the 5th, and he was not in the town that he was actually in another town taking care of his mother. And he ended up going to the hospital there and then transferred to Salt Lake to the hospital there. And he spent approximately 20 days in the hospital. And I was not able to have any visitation to him. And so, the phone was the only communication that I had with him, because for some odd reason, the hospital never had it set up where they could do Zoom meetings. And I learned so much from this experience that somebody else could never have told me, because I just never would have understood it to the depth that I do. That feeling of being on the outside, not being included in the doctor's meetings or the nursing meetings or the physical therapy, the dietary meetings. And I just really gained an empathy for the residents that we advocate for, that I never had to the level that I do now. And it is such a lonesome, isolated feeling to not be able to be with your loved one, and to know when you kiss them goodbye that you may never see them again because of the seriousness of what their situation is. And our individuals that are in nursing homes and assisted livings, I just really ache for the families that are on the outside and truly do not have that contact or the ability to see whether they're doing well or whether they're declining. For a period of time, my husband wasn't able to communicate with me. And that is really a hard period of time, to not be able to at least talk on the phone to them. And so many of our families have this because the individuals have dementia or a medical condition that they just aren't able to communicate. And I just wanted to share that with you, as how real what are those who we advocate for, what they're going through. It's a very challenging thing. Mine came to an end. I was able to take my husband home, but so many families, their loved ones pass away and they just never have that opportunity. And I just wanted to share that. I just feel like what we do is, it's really, there's hardly words for what we do when we are able to make connections for families. So
Thanks for sharing that, Amanda.
yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Said, Amanda. Well said. So the good news is he's home, and now she's probably bothering him to death. So, which is
No, no,
probably-
no, no. Let's get that right. He's bothering me to death.
Oh, okay.
It's me who's doing the running.
Might as well take advantage of the situation.
That's right. That's right. Well, listen, thank you all. Thank you, Joe and Mark, for your years of wisdom. And the rest of you know that your buddies across the country are there to answer questions, be a shoulder to lean on. And of course, the National Ombudsman Resource Center, we will help in any way we can. And if that includes connecting you with another state or looking for old resources or new resources, we're here for you. So with that, we will conclude today, and I hope everybody finds something really fun to do this weekend, and then you can let me know on Monday what it was that you did that was fun. Goodbye. Thanks.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
See you later.